There's a car that changed America, not the Mustang, not the Corvette, not any of the legends that get the posters, the Hollywood cameos, and the museum wings with the velvet ropes and the dramatic lighting. This car was small, practical, sensible. And, in 1950, when every other automaker in this country was racing to build bigger, heavier, more chrome-loaded machines, this little car quietly showed up and said, "You're all going in the wrong direction." Its name was the Nash Rambler, and almost nobody gives it the credit it deserves. You've heard of the Ford Falcon, the Plymouth Valiant, the Chevrolet Corvair, the cars that launched America's celebrated compact revolution in 1960. They got the headlines, the magazine covers, the industry awards, but here's what consistently gets buried. The Nash Rambler did all of that first, a full decade earlier. Without the financial muscle of a major corporation, without a billion-dollar advertising machine, against the most powerful and entrenched industry on the planet. So why doesn't anyone talk about it? That's exactly what we're going to get into today. Because the story of the Nash Rambler is not simply a car story. It's the story of one man's iron conviction in the face of an entire industry telling him he was wrong. It's about a car that was right before America was ready for it. And it's about a truth that goes well beyond the automobile. Being first doesn't always mean getting the credit. Sometimes, being first means getting forgotten. Now, before we go further, picture America in 1945. The war is over. Soldiers are coming home by the hundreds of thousands. And the whole country is holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. Most serious economists were predicting a slow, cautious recovery. The memory of the Great Depression was still raw, still present in the way people spent, saved, and planned. The automakers read those signals. Ford, General Motors, they quietly began developing smaller, more affordable cars, suited for a post-war world where money might stay tight for years. Then the economy exploded. Americans didn't want small and cautious. They had won the war, and now they wanted to feel it. Dealerships couldn't produce full-size cars fast enough. Those compact projects got shelved, buried in a drawer, and Detroit went back to doing exactly what Detroit did best, building machines that were longer, heavier, wider, and more extravagant with every passing model year. Every single car maker made that turn, except one. Nash Kelvinator Corporation was headquartered in Kenosha, Wisconsin, not Detroit, not the center of American automotive power. And that distance, geographic, cultural, psychological, may be exactly what gave them the freedom to think in ways that the industry's mainstream simply couldn't. The man running Nash Kelvinator was George W. Mason. And George Mason was not your typical auto executive. He wasn't chasing the same trophy as everyone else in the business. He genuinely believed the American car market was heading toward a wall, that the obsession with size, with excess, with relentless escalation, was not a long-term winning strategy. He was convinced the future belonged to cars that were smaller, smarter, and more efficient. In an industry where men measured success in inches of chrome and feet of hood length, George Mason was considered, at best, eccentric. At worst, a man who simply didn't understand his own market. But Mason's philosophy was clear, and it was consistent. Don't make it cheap, make it small, and make it genuinely good. Because the moment you sell a small car as a cheap car, you have already lost the argument. You have told the customer that choosing something smaller is a compromise, a downgrade, a surrender of aspiration. Mason refused to position the Rambler that way. From the very beginning, he insisted it would be offered with a level of standard equipment that comparable full-size cars didn't match. When the Rambler was introduced to the public on April 10, 1950, it arrived not as a stripped-down economy box but as a convertible. A stylish, two-door open-top car that Nash called the Landau, and it came loaded: radio, heater, white-wall tires, full wheel covers, custom upholstery, all of it standard equipment. The price was $1,808. There were full-size Fords and Chevrolets available for less, but Mason was deliberately positioning the Rambler above the bargain market, not inside it. He wanted buyers to see it not as a small car they were settling for, but as one they were consciously, proudly choosing. And beneath that clever market positioning was a genuinely impressive piece of engineering. The Rambler rode on a 100-inch wheelbase. It weighed around 2,500 pounds. It used unitized body construction, a single welded structure combining body and frame, which Nash claimed was twice as rigid as conventional ladder frame designs. The engine was a 173 cubic inch L-head inline-six, producing 82 horsepower, modest by the standards of the day. But in a car that light, it was more than sufficient to move briskly and return fuel economy figures that were genuinely remarkable, up to 30 miles per gallon. At a time when the American average sat around 30 miles per gallon in 1950. Let that settle for a moment. 2 months after the convertible launched, Nash added a two-door station wagon. Families noticed, women noticed, people who needed real practicality without feeling like they were operating a truck noticed. By the end of the 1950 model year, Nash had sold 11,428 Ramblers. For a first year, from a smaller manufacturer, with a car that broke nearly every conventional rule about what Americans supposedly wanted, that was a number worth paying very close attention to. 1951 changed the conversation entirely. Nash expanded the Rambler lineup, and the numbers responded with real force. A new body style arrived: the Country Club, a pillarless two-door hardtop with clean, uncluttered lines, and a genuinely modern look that stood apart from the heavy, ornamented designs coming out of the full-size market. The station wagon carried over, now offered in multiple trim levels with upholstery and interior finishes that belonged in a car costing considerably more than the Rambler's asking price. Total Rambler sales for 1951 reached over 70,000 units. From a car the rest of the industry had quietly written off as a curiosity. From a company that didn't even register on the same scale as the Big Three. But here is the detail that almost nobody ever mentions, and this one deserves your full attention. In July of 1951, a NASCAR-sanctioned race was held in Lanham, Maryland, a 400-lap event on a quarter-mile short track. 25 cars entered. And sitting at the back of the starting field, among machines built for straight-line power and heavy-footed racing, was a Nash Rambler Country Club hardtop, the smallest car in the entire field. The driver was Tony Bonadies of the Bronx, New York. Nobody expected much from him or from the little Nash he was wheeling. Bonadies drove with patience and precision. Lap after lap, he worked his way steadily through the field. When the checkered flag finally fell, the Nash Rambler was in front. Tony Bonadies won the race outright. But that wasn't even the most remarkable part of that day. The Nash Rambler completed all 100 miles of that race, every one of those 400 laps, without making a single pit stop, not one. Every other competitor stopped at least once. The Rambler simply didn't need to. It was engineered to go the distance without the constant attention that its larger, thirstier rivals demanded. It was a metaphor that George Mason could have written himself. Then, in 1953, came another development that signaled Nash was operating on a completely different level. The company brought in Pininfarina, the legendary Italian design house from Turin that had shaped some of the most admired European cars of the post-war era, to consult on styling. This was an extraordinary move for an American manufacturer of any size. For a company the scale of Nash Kelvinator, it was almost audacious. The interior had already been elevated by the work of Helene Rother, a pioneering female automotive designer who had gotten her start at General Motors in 1943, making her one of the very first women to hold a design role in the American auto industry. Rother selected fabrics, colors, and finishes with a care and deliberateness that was simply unheard of at this price point. You sat inside a Rambler and it did not feel like a compromise. It felt intentional, considered, like someone had actually thought carefully about you, the person sitting there. Mason was constructing something quietly extraordinary, and then the walls started closing in. By 1953, the American car market had turned into a full-scale battlefield. Ford and Chevrolet locked into an all-out sales war. Both companies were slashing prices, flooding dealers with inventory, and burning through money they didn't fully have, all to win a fight driven as much by institutional pride as by sound business logic. Neither could afford to be outsold by the other, and neither particularly cared about the collateral damage being inflicted on everyone else competing in the same space. That collateral damage was severe. Hudson was bleeding out, Packard was struggling to maintain relevance, Studebaker was running out of runway. The independent automakers, who had survived the first half of the 20th century by being nimble, creative, and willing to serve buyers, the big three ignored. They were being crushed by the sheer weight of resources they could not match. Nash Kelvinator wasn't immune to the pressure, but the Rambler kept finding its buyers, steadily, quietly, the kind of buyer who had already made a deliberate decision to want something different and who wasn't moving. For years, George Mason had been pushing for a merger between the struggling independents, believing that Nash, Hudson, Packard, and Studebaker together could form a fourth force capable of genuinely challenging the big three. Alone, each was vulnerable. United, they might survive. In January of 1954, part of that vision came true. Hudson voted to merge with Nash, and American Motors Corporation, AMC, was born. Nash Kelvinator was the financially stronger half. Mason became president. A sharp, driven executive named George Romney came in as his right hand. The merger made sense strategically. Execution was another matter. There wasn't enough time or capital to develop truly new vehicles for both brands simultaneously. So AMC did what cornered companies often do: they badge engineered. Ramblers wearing Hudson emblems sold through Hudson dealers. It wasn't elegant, but it kept the operation alive. Through all of that upheaval, the Rambler kept improving. For 1954, four-door versions arrived on a longer 108-inch wheelbase, making it a genuinely viable choice for families who couldn't previously consider the two-door models. And the fuel economy narrative kept building. In the 1955 Mobile Economy Run, one of the most respected and closely watched efficiency tests of the entire era, a four-door Rambler, equipped with an automatic transmission, returned 27.47 miles per gallon, a new record for any car fitted with an automatic gearbox. 27.47 miles per gallon, automatic transmission, 1955. The industry registered the number, then turned its attention elsewhere. Because in 1955, the conversation in American automotive culture was not about efficiency or restraint or the responsible use of fuel. It was about tail fins, about V8 displacement, about cars that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film and felt like mobile living rooms. The Rambler was speaking a language the country simply wasn't prepared to hear. Before we continue, if this kind of story is landing with you, take a moment, right now, and subscribe to this channel. We cover the real history, the decisions, the people, the moments that most places skip over. Drop a comment and tell us, did you ever ride in a Rambler, or know someone who owned one? Like the video, and if you know someone who'd appreciate this, send it to them. Now, the most difficult part of this story is still ahead. Then, in the autumn of 1954, something happened that nobody at AMC had seen coming. George Mason was hospitalized with acute pancreatitis. The illness progressed quickly. He developed pneumonia, and on October 9, 1954, George W. Mason died. He was 60 years old. There was no dramatic farewell, no final address to his engineers or his board. One of the most quietly visionary figures in the history of the American automobile simply wasn't there anymore. George Romney stepped into the presidency of AMC. And Romney was a fundamentally different kind of leader. Where Mason had been a careful, long-horizon strategist, someone willing to absorb years of skepticism in pursuit of a larger point, Romney was more direct, more combative, less willing to wait for the world to come around on its own. But he shared Mason's core conviction about the compact car, and he was prepared to put everything on the line to prove it. Romney began publicly attacking the direction of the American auto industry in terms that no executive of his stature had used before. He called the massive, ever-expanding cars, rolling out of Detroit, gas-guzzling dinosaurs. He said it in public. He repeated it. He pointed at the Big Three by name and argued that the relentless pursuit of size and excess was not just aesthetically wrong, it was economically reckless and ultimately self-defeating. At a time when criticizing Detroit's mainstream was considered professional suicide, Romney kept talking. That took a particular kind of nerve. But here is where the story delivers its hardest blow, and this is the moment that still stings if you understand what it means. Despite the fuel economy records, despite winning a NASCAR race without a single pit stop, despite 70,000 sales in a single year, despite the Pininfarina styling and the Helene Rother interiors and the 30 miles per gallon and the unitized construction that was years ahead of what the Big Three were offering, despite being right demonstrably, measurably right about everything that would matter enormously within just a few years, the original Nash Rambler was discontinued after the 1955 model year. 56,000 units built in that final year, and then it was over. AMC redirected its focus toward a larger Rambler on the 108-inch wheelbase, where the volume numbers made more commercial sense. The compact that had started the entire conversation was quietly pulled from production. The car that invented the compact car category was killed by the commercial logic of the very market it had created. 1956. 1957. The American car kept growing. Tail fins climbed higher with every new model year. Wheelbase lengths expanded. Engine displacements reached new records. Advertisements showed beaming families standing beside machines that were longer than some city apartments, and the implication was clear. This is what success looks like. This is what you drive when you've arrived. AMC kept the larger Rambler in production and tried to find its footing. Romney continued to make noise about the absurdity of the direction Detroit was taking, but the company was surviving more than it was thriving. Without the resources to genuinely compete in the full-size segment, AMC was running a careful, constrained race against opponents with nearly unlimited fuel. Then the economy stumbled. The recession of 1957 and 1958 arrived with real force. Unemployment climbed. Consumer confidence deteriorated. People who had been stretching their household budgets to afford bigger and more impressive cars began asking a very different question: not which car makes the strongest statement, but which car actually makes sense. It was the question George Mason had been asking since 1950, 7 years earlier, in a room where nobody wanted to listen. Romney acted without hesitation. He ordered the compact Rambler brought back. AMC reached into storage and retrieved the tooling from the discontinued 1955 Nash Rambler. Using that foundation, they built a new car for the 1958 model year, the Rambler American, a two-door sedan and station wagon on the original 100-inch wheelbase. Efficient, practical, stripped of pretension, and priced starting at $1,789, making it the lowest-priced American family car available that year. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Over 30,000 Rambler Americans were sold in that shortened first model year, more than double AMC's break-even projection. Total Rambler production across all models for 1958 reached 162,000 vehicles. A company that had been teetering on the edge of irrelevance was suddenly unable to build cars fast enough to meet demand. And here is the irony that automotive history consistently fails to give its proper weight. The Ford Falcon, the Chevrolet Corvair, the Plymouth Valiant all debuted in 1960. They were celebrated, extensively analyzed, written about in every major automotive publication in the country. They defined a new era and became reference points that are still discussed and respected today. But those cars walked a road the Nash Rambler had already paved, a full decade before. Without the financial resources, without the brand recognition, and without the safety net of a corporation capable of absorbing years of losses while waiting for the market to arrive. The Falcon, the Valiant, the Corvair arrived when America was ready. The Nash Rambler arrived when America wasn't, and it stayed the course anyway. That is the difference between following a trend and creating one. So, what do we actually take from this story? It would be easy and tempting to frame the Nash Rambler as a tragedy, the little car that was right too soon, the visionary who died before seeing his own vindication, the idea that was ignored until someone more powerful copied it and received all the recognition. But I don't think that's the honest reading. The Nash Rambler did not fail. It was discontinued, and those are two very different things. The car itself proved every single thing it set out to prove. It demonstrated that an American compact could be well built, thoughtfully equipped, genuinely comfortable, and commercially viable. It proved that argument with sales figures. It proved it on a short track in Lanham, Maryland in July of 1951. It proved it in the 1955 Mobile Economy run, with a record nobody in Detroit wanted to discuss. The market wasn't ready, but the car was ready. The idea was ready. And the foundation laid quietly and persistently in Kenosha, Wisconsin, by George Mason and the team around him turned out to be the foundation that the entire American compact car movement eventually stood on. When the recession hit and the moment finally came, George Romney didn't need to invent a new concept. He reached back into a drawer, pulled out what Mason had already built, and offered America something it had been offered years before this time, with the economic climate finally aligned to hear it. And the revolution of 1960, the Falcon, the Valiant, the Corvair, the compact cars that reshaped American motoring, they were built, consciously or not, on the groundwork the Rambler had already established. There's something in this story that reaches beyond automobile history. It's about the real cost of being ahead of your time, about the quiet determination required to keep building something you believe in when the market keeps looking the other way, about the men and women Mason, Romney, and the engineers and assembly workers in Kenosha who kept going. The Nash Rambler never got the parade. It got discontinued and then vindicated by everything that followed. That is a story worth knowing. If this kind of history matters to you, subscribe to this channel right now. We cover the real story behind the machines and the decisions that shape the world we live in. No filler, no shortcuts. Leave a comment and tell us, did the Nash Rambler ever cross your path? A memory, a family car, a neighbor who swore by one? We want to hear it. Hit like, and if this is something a friend of yours would value, send it to them today. The Nash Rambler gave America the compact car. It just never got the credit it deserved. Now you know why.